Hello everybody, welcome to this instruction video. This video I'd like to show you how to make week 10 of the Crochet Along Last Dance on the Beach by Scheepjes. This square this week has a beautiful knit effect and has been designed by Sarah from Crafts from the Cwtch and of course in loving memory of Marinka. If you're using yarn from your kit, you'll be using Color Crafter or Merino soft yarn. Please check your pattern exactly which color you need this week. A word on hook sizes for this week. I actually had to go up a hook size, so I used a 4.5mm hook for my Color Crafter and a 5mm hook for my Merino soft. So this is 0.5mm up compared to my gauge swatch. But then again, maybe you do not need to go up a hook size. It isn't, will always be a personal way of working which hook size you need. We're taking you through the rows making up the square. We'll actually be working in this direction, so when we're finished we turn the square to get it in the upright position. I hope it's a useful video for you, and thank you for watching. With a slip knot on my hook, we're going to chain 30. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 29, 30. Going to go back in the third chain from your hook and work a half treble in there and every stitch following. So skip the first two and the third chain, work a half treble and continue and work a half treble in every chain stitch. Then you're going to work 28 half trebles in total. And a few more to go. 2 more half trebles and then we're here at the beginning of the row again. Like so. And then you've worked 28 half trebles. Now we're ready to start the pattern. So before we actually start crocheting the pattern for this week, I'd just like to show you a little bit about stitch anatomy. Looking at the stitches that you've made, look at it from this side. If you look at the top of the stitch, you see of course this little V. And when you work into a stitch, you work in it like that. Now, this of course you know. What you've maybe not heard of before is the so-called front loop, or a third loop it's sometimes also called. And if you look at in front of your stitch, so this is the stitch, if you look in front of it, you see a little loop here. And this is the loop that we're going to be working in. And this is a front loop in this pattern. And you also have a back loop. So if this was the back loop of your stitch, you have a loop here to the back of that, and that's this loop here. And these two loops we're going to be working in. Some patterns refer to this loop as the third loop, and this loop arises from your yarn over. The moment you yarn over for your half treble, you're actually making this little loop here, so that's where it comes from. So we're going to be working in the front third loop, or front loop, on when you're going one direction, and when we're going in the other direction, we're going to be working in the back loop. That's going to be this one here. So we're not working into the actual stitch, this pattern. So only to the front or to the back. But I'll show you exactly which loops it are as we come across them. But now you have a rough idea of which loops we're talking about for this week. For row 2, go to chain 2, turn your work. And now we're going to work a series of half trebles in this front loop. And that's going to be this loop here. So if you have your stitch, you see there's the stitch and the loop that's to the front of that. So we're going to work a half treble in each of these. Now this chain 2 does not count as a stitch, so this half treble here is the first one. It's easiest if you take it from bottom to top into that loop. And then just complete your half treble. and then in the loop immediately next to it you're going to continue and work 28 half trebles like this. Every time in that front loop, that third loop that's in front of your stitch. So if you see, here's your stitch, so that loop that's to the front. And I have my work also now actually slightly turned to make it easier for me to get into that loop. And what's very important for this pattern is that you don't accidentally forget your very last stitch, number 28. I've done a lot of counting this week to always make sure that I have 28 stitches, because that last one can be really sneaky and you can just not see it, and then before you know it you actually have 27 stitches, and the next round you have 26 stitches, and you have 25 stitches, and before you know it you're working a triangle instead of a square. So always keep on checking that you have 28 stitches. Like I said, I've done a lot of counting this week. So continue until to the end of the row, and I'll show you the end and how to turn. Three more half trebles to go. So this is number 27. And 28 is here. You have a stitch, so there's still one before this, and this first one is actually not so bad the first time you do row 2, but when you repeat row 2 this stitch here can be very sneaky and very hard to see. So count your stitches if you're ever in doubt. So I've now done 28 half trebles in the front loop. For row 3 we're going to do them in the back loop. So row 3, I'm going to start with a chain 2 again, which does not count as a stitch, it's just to turn. So I'm now turning my work, and now we're going to be working not in the front loop. Let me just open up here. So now we're not working in this loop here. You should turn your work to the other side, going to work in these loops that are here to the back. So those are these loops here. Those are the ones we're now going to be working in. And what I found to work these loops is it's actually easier if I have my work like this as opposed to this, because these loops can be a little tricky to get into. And I do know that some people find this loop very hard to get into. So we're going to work a half treble, and the first one is already over here. So this is the first one. Back loop, and your second. And what I found is that row 3 just takes me more time than row 2, and that's just because this loop is maybe just a little less natural to work in than the front loop. So this back loop here, so I've got my work now turned like this because I found that easier. If you want, you can of course still keep your work like this and then work in it. But this is just what I found easier for me. So you see here, here's your stitch, that's the stitch, and then that loop that to the back of this. So you have now the wrong side of your work facing. You're actually always working in the wrong side facing you. So if we go to the front, you can see how you're already building these ridges that look like network. And so you're always going to be working in the loop that has that's facing you with the back of your work facing. If you have the front of your work facing, if you're like this, and you're working a front loop here, then you know something's wrong. Then you flipped your repeat somewhere, because you always have the back facing. And again, count your stitches if you're ever in doubt whether or not you've missed a stitch somewhere. I'm going to do 28, and then I'm just going to show you the end again. A few more stitches to go. one, I've got two more here. I've got a loop here, this one, and then I've got one more stitch, that's this loop here, yeah, that one. Then that's number 28 half trebles. If you're ever in doubt whether or not there is a stitch there, just count your stitches, and if you have 27 here, you know, okay, there should be one more that I somehow missed, then make one extra stitch. So keep on counting this these stitches that you made. We're now at the end of row 3, and this is actually a good moment to check for size. My gauge swatch, I'm just going to check my work on that. It's of course the same color, so you really have to pay a little bit of attention. It's not as easy to see as it normally is. But you see here, I'm just inside the edges on both sides, and I'm very happy with the width that I have here. So I'm happy with this hook size, and I'm going to continue like this. If you're really over or under, consider changing your hook size. But there is also some stretch in this fabric that we're making, so a half a centimeter or so you'll be able to catch with blocking. I'm happy with this, so I'm going to continue. So what you've just done, rows 2 and 3, you're basically going to repeat these until you have 21 rows. I am, however, going to show you row 2 and 3 again, especially because of the ends, that you don't skip stitches. I want to show you what to look for. But basically row 2 and 3, you're just going to repeat one after the other until you have 21 rows in total. The repeat of row 2, I'm going to start with the chain 2. This does not count as a stitch, and turn your work. You again have the back of your work facing, and we're going to work in the front loop, and that's going to be this stitch here, that one, that loop. Because you see, if you turn your work ever so slightly to the top, you'll see there's the V of the stitch, and then just this loop you're going for. So I'm going to work a half treble in those. So the chain 2 does not count as a stitch, so you want that loop of that very first stitch. You already want that one. That's your first one. Now you're going to work a half treble in each, and I'm working them from bottom to top, inserting my hook. Don't try to do this, because that's just making life hard for you and doesn't get a nice result. You want bottom to top. And continue until you're at the end of the row. Then I just want to show you what to look for your last stitch. Almost to the end of the row, and I've done 25 half trebles. And if you look at your stitches, you'll think, I'll forgive you for thinking that you only have 2 more loops left, this one and that one, but then you only work 27 stitches. And what's a little tricky is that there's still a little loop here, and this one you also want. And that's why it can be very valuable to just count your stitches, and then you'll say, oh wait, I've only got 27, I need one more. And this last loop here, that's on that last stitch, that's kind of also jumbled here in the turn. So it's that loop, this loop, and this one. So we're going to work 3 stitches. This is number 26, 27, and then this last one here, that one there, or you may just have to help a little bit, then that is number 28, like so. And that little loop I've forgotten myself quite a few times, and then you work a triangle and not a square, so be mindful of that little loop. Row 3, again chain 2, turn your work. you have the front of your work facing, but for the repeat of row 3 you want to work in the back loops. So that again, if you turn your work with the back facing, these little loops here, that one, that one, that one, those little loops, those are the ones you want. And what I find easiest for these loops, if I turn my work like this, just a quarter, and now we're going to work half trebles in all of those. So in that first loop, that back loop, or the third loop, different patterns call it different ways. For this pattern we call it the back loop. You work a half treble in each. And if you don't like to turn your work a quarter like I do, that means that's also fine. If you prefer having your work like this and catching that loop this way is also fine. I just find it a little easier if I have my work like this. And continue and work a stitch in each one of these loops. And I just find that for these back loops that I often have to help them a little bit. Somehow I seem to have them just a little tighter than the front loop. So continue and work a half treble in every stitch, and I'll just see you at the end of row 3 repeat. I have 3 more stitches to go. You see that loop, this loop here, and there's one still over here. These 3 loops. If you're ever in doubt, please count your stitches. That's 1, then this is number 27, and again this last one, it's not quite as bad as for the row 2 repeat, but this one is also one that you could forget if you didn't pay close attention. Like so. Then that brings you to again 28 stitches, and then you've now repeated row 3, so now you were to repeat row 2 again. If you just look at the pattern for a moment, you see how you're really building this knitted effect. So all your actual stitch is flipped to the front, is bent to the front. That gives this lovely knitted effect. So continue like this, repeat rows 2 and 3 until you have 21 rows in total. When you've done all your rows of stitches, and this has most probably taken you quite some time, especially those back loop stitches, we're going to make a border of again 26 double crochets and 3 in the corner, exactly the same as we've done before. To do it, chain 1, and remember you have 21 rows here and you need 26 stitches, so basically you can do 1 in every row, and then here and there you do an extra one. So I'm going to do my border, make all those double crochets, and I'm also going to use the chain 2 loop to I'm actually using it for the border. I'm making 2 stitches there, but this is just a little bit of well, just fudging actually. Just distribute these double crochets evenly, go all the way around. So, and when you get to a corner, you work 3 double crochets in your corner, exactly the same as you've done all the weeks before. You can see how you're getting a nice edge there, and this edge will make it possible for you to actually connect your squares when we're finished. So go all the way around, do 3 in the corner, mark your second stitch, and do 26 along each edge. When you're all done, your square looks like this. You'll see that it curls considerably, so you're really going to have to block your square to get rid of this curl. And you'll also be turning your square to have it facing upright, because this is the upright position. Take a note of your little stitches, the V's of your stitches. You can have them pointing downwards like this, which I like. And in theory you would also be able to have them the other way around, but I think this looks best, and the pattern also says that this is the right side up. But if you like it the other way, that's of course also fine. So take a moment to block your square. If you've blocked it, it looks like this, which is just more flat and straight. This is the merino soft square actually, and I really like how this pattern has come out with the net effect of all these stitches. You'll be making 4 of these this week, so take your time on all those back loop stitches, and when you're done, you're ready for next week, where we'll be making a new square again.